How much did this cost, she wondered. Cost or no cost, she frequently wished she could sneak in a little nap. However, the madam made regular patrols which put an end to that idea. She herself had been quite a high-class courtesan in her younger days and was more educated than the average person. "Can't you recite even one of these poems?" she demanded. "It's a medical exam. Why is poetry even on it?" Maomao shot back. Strictly speaking, she wouldn't be taking the medical officer's examination. Instead, she was taking the exam for court ladies who wished to serve in the medical office. There were a number of qualifications necessary to become a court lady, but the position of a court lady specializing in medicine was something new. In Maomao's opinion, if they were going to create a new specialty, they should have taken the opportunity to remove poetry from the test. She complained it has nothing to do with medicine. There is also history on the test, even sutra copying. She continued, knowing history changes a person from the inside out. And the better your handwriting is, the easier it will be to read. Copying sutras is excellent practice. It figured this was the moment the madam would talk sense. Maomao wished she would just say something like, "Don't bother learning anything that's not going to make money," as she usually did. Perhaps it was too much to hope for, considering the amount of silver involved this time. The characters the old woman wrote for Maomao to copy were lovely. Her hand is like a withered branch now, but once upon a time she had boasted shining nails. Her fingers were as nimble as fish sliding through the water. Men liked women with beautiful handwriting. Men liked women with beautiful looks. She had spent her life polishing herself for the benefit of men, and now she was pounding the same lessons into the ladies of the pleasure quarter. If she had been so beautiful, why hadn't she chosen some other life? Perhaps there hadn't been a choice. Maomao voiced a thought that sometimes crossed her mind. She said, "You can write beautiful characters and still say awful things with them." She thought the next thing she felt might be the madam's knuckles crashing down on her head, but nothing happened. "No one knows if you are beautiful or filthy on the inside," the old woman said, "so you might as well write pretty." Then she looked at the examples pointedly, as if to say, "Now get to it." The flawless, perfectly balanced characters looked like they could have been an answer sheet for the civil service examination itself. "Yeah, okay," Maomao said, knowing the rod waited for her if she tried to slack off. She rolled up her sleeves and picked up her brush. The court ladies' test was given with some regularity. Unlike the civil service examination, this test was taken only by young women. These women would not serve as long as the men, so there was frequent employee turnover. This meant there was a constant need for fresh blood. Most of the women who sought to become court ladies were the daughters of officials or rich merchant households. For them, court service was an achievement to boast as a potential bride. It was also a way of finding a husband. Very few women applied to the service out of a passion for the work. Maomao had experienced some nastiness at the hands of some of the court ladies during her time as Jinchi's attendant. It certainly hadn't looked to her like the women had been taking their jobs very seriously. The test took place in a school building in the northern part of the capital. The civil service exam was given in another city, somewhere north of the capital. However, because the women's service exam was held often, it was much easier to take it in the capital itself. After 2 weeks of non-stop studying, Maomao arrived at the examination feeling disheartened. There were around 100 people present. This wasn't surprising, as it wasn't just aspiring medical assistants who attended. There isn't much to say about the exam itself. It finished in a couple of hours, and Maomao immediately went home. They had already checked her preliminary paperwork. She hadn't really expected to fail at that stage. She almost began to worry she had passed because of special treatment. But if they were going to give me that treatment, then why would they make me do all that studying? She preferred to believe she could succeed based on her own merit. She was fairly confident in her work. If anything would challenge her, it would be the classical poetry and sutra copying. These were subjects in which she had little interest. Honestly, if she had made a mistake on anything else, she wished they would tell her. The medical attendant exam had consisted of very elementary knowledge of drugs and medicine. Maomao could have answered 10 times as many questions as they had asked, given the time for the test. After quickly finishing the answers, Maomao did not have anything specific to do. She decided she would start walking home. And she would have if only she hadn't heard the moronic voice. What do you mean I can't take the test?" There was some sort of argument happening in front of the testing center. It involved the official in charge of the examination and someone who looked like a test taker. But there was something strange about this particular examinee. They were dressed in women's clothing, but they were physically pretty large. Sure, there were tall women around. But this person also had a low voice, one Maomao recognized. I feel like this isn't the first time I've seen something like this, she thought. She wished she could ignore the bad feeling she had. She was unable to dismiss the bizarre scene. Why, sir, why won't you let me in? The woman asked, taking care to speak with impeccable politeness. Her face was hidden with a cloth. At that point, Maomao's suspicions turned to certainty. It was true that the person resembled a woman, at least when you looked at their face. They had attractive, balanced and delicate facial features, and their makeup was flawless. However, the person was clearly speaking in falsetto. Also, the way they squirmed was particularly unappealing. What are you doing? Maomao asked. She could have ignored the whole situation, but she felt sorry for the official who was caught in the middle. He was a kind man. If Maomao had been in his position, she would have immediately called security. Kokyu, this woman was actually a man Maomao had first met on a ship returning from the western capital. He had smallpox scars covering half his face and the cloth was there to hide them. He was a doctor, but the scars made it difficult to find good work. However, his silly personality wasn't due to bad luck. Oh, Maomao, it has been a while. You won't believe what happened. This mean man won't let me take the exam. He winked at her with his one visible eye as if to say, play along. She wished he wouldn't do that. It was creepy. It did not matter if I wanted to play along with him. The test is over already. What? You're kidding, he screeched, putting his hands to his cheeks theatrically. Very helpful. The poor guy is just doing his job. Come on, Maomao said, and dragged Kokyu away from the testing center. It is a frightful thing to be caught up in the flow of events. For example, the above led immediately and inexorably to Maomao having lunch with a weirdo wearing women's clothing. She wished he would change, but unfortunately he hadn't brought another outfit with him. He told Maomao he had borrowed the costume from the wife of the chief of the village where he was living. This caused Maomao to have doubts about her as well. And here, I finally thought I'd found my new job. So the next exam isn't for 2 months, is it? It doesn't matter, you can't take it, you aren't qualified. Though if you're looking to get castrated, I'd be happy to help. Oh, please don't do that, Kokyu said, shrinking back and squirming again. So creepy, I thought you were helping the old guy anyway. What happened to that? Last Maomao knew, Kokyu had been assisting an old doctor in a neighboring village. They seemed to get along well, even if the old guy was a bit of a weirdo. Gramps hasn't been feeling too well lately. He said he thinks he is going to retire from medical work pretty soon, and that I should find somewhere new while the finding is good. Maomao's expression was conflicted, for she had an inkling of why the old physician might be feeling so weak. That was when she heard about this brand new opportunity to be an assistant in the medical office. Well, check the requirements next time. Actually, he probably had that was why he'd shown up in women's clothing. She still wished he would do something about that. He looked rather attractive, and some of the men around were staring at him. His half-hidden face gave him an air of mystery. If they had heard his voice, though, it would have taken their breath away. Maomao was eating a small, light bun, while Kokyu was having some steamed dumplings. Gramps said he would give me the house if I wanted to stay in the village, Kokyu remarked. There are plenty of medicinal herbs around there too, so you just take over for him. Sounds good to me. What is the problem? Maomao asked. It is not that simple. Gramps was a former medical officer, right? People came from far and wide to see him because he had that authority. I don't think people will come from far and wide to see someone who just happened to turn up and take over the place. There was truth to that. Kokyu might have gained some measure of trust from people in the village itself. However, such a small settlement wouldn't provide enough work to put food on the table. Gather and sell enough herbs and medical concoctions, and you might just barely scrape by. At that moment, Maomao held up her pointer finger. These problems solve each other. She said, would you be interested in coming out to the pleasure district a few times a month? Kokyu only had to think about it for a moment. If you pay my traveling expenses, certainly. And it would be great if I could get a meal out of it. We have so much rice we can afford to sell some, so I don't think that should be a problem. They had the rice and wheat they'd gained after the events in the quack doctor's village, and now they had sweet potatoes as well. They had so many sweet potatoes they were thinking about stewing them and candying them. Maomao went on. Your brief would be to teach medicinal and herbal knowledge to the apprentice apothecary there, and to continue supplying the herbs we've bought in the past. She continued, I also want you to mix any medicines the apprentice finds difficult to manage. However, both he and our landlord, the madam, will need to approve anything you create. She felt that was only fair, considering she was asking a stranger of unknown origins to do the work. The apprentice apothecary can handle running the shop, so you won't even have to talk to customers. But I'm a great salesperson, Kokyu said, squirming again, considering he had been unable to find a job precisely because his looks kept customers from wanting to talk to him. Maomao chose to ignore him. How's this for a salary? Maomao held up one finger. Combined with his work at the village, it was enough to eat, even if the compensation was on the low side for an apothecary. How's this? Kokyu said, pulling up a couple more of Maomao's fingers. Then they both burst out laughing. Maomao also glared at him. He acted like an idiot, but he had a keen sense of the market. She ended up debating every detail of the budget with him, despite his seemingly simple method of counting on his fingers. At least she got to munch on a bun while she did it. Chapter 2 Harassment. Seizen looked intensely relieved when Maomao told him she had found another apothecary. I am so glad I won't have to tend the shop all by myself again, he said. Frankly, Maomao would have preferred to hear an indignant I can handle this on my own. But very well. The days after the exam were an all too brief interlude of peace. She had done what she was told, but 2 solid weeks of nothing but studying had brought her only pain. She was very pleased to be able to get back to working in the field and making medicine. A few days later, a letter arrived. She presumed it was her acceptance, and as it happened, she was right. The madam had said it would be a wonder if anybody failed that test when Maomao had told her about the contents of the exam. Achieving a perfect score was a real challenge, but a passing grade was only 60%. Even Maomao, who had relied mostly on cramming, thought she had gotten at least an 80. The women who had studied properly for the examination could hardly have done worse than her. Even when it came to the medical knowledge portion, there were few specialized questions. Most of the items would be easy enough to answer if you took your time and thought them through. Only a really smart person could think that. Hello Grams, Maomao. Perrin slid into the room looking particularly slovenly. This princess of the verdigris house, one of 3, must have had a customer the night before. Her skin was glowing. The customer, for his part, had probably been drained of his essence. He had likely gone home looking like a withered fruit. Some people said that her mastery of fangzhongshu, the arts of the bedchamber, kept Perrin's beauty undiminished. She was the oldest courtesan at the establishment, well past 30 years old. Someone remarked that just thinking about it made their head hurt. I tried to learn it, but it just won't go in my brain, she said. Well, everyone had different strengths. Generally, you could achieve most things more or less if you worked hard enough, but there were some things that effort alone couldn't help with. Maomao's older sister, Perrin, was not a very strong writer. When she tried to write, the characters often appeared backwards, like they were looking at a mirror. The old lady had tried many times to improve Perrin's handwriting, but the habit remained. Perrin always needed someone to check her writing, or she would simply have someone write for her. She was an unparalleled dancer, almost as if to compensate for something else. There was none better in the whole pleasure district. That's great that you passed and all, but so what? Do you even own clothes you can go to work in? I assume that's their problem, said Maomao. She was perfectly happy to let someone else do the work and did not feel the least bit obliged to make any special preparations herself. Even the day before the test, a messenger arrived from Gaeshun with clothing and writing utensils. She thought the messenger was also meant to accompany her to and from the testing center. However, having a babysitter like that sounded like a headache, so she ignored him. She was now free to have lunch with the cross-dressing Kokyu, for better or for worse. The acceptance letter stated that all who passed the test should assemble at court the day after next. Then, each person would head to their assigned department. A wooden token, scorched with a symbol of a flower, came with the letter. She thought it was her ticket into the palace grounds. Maomao hummed and placed the letter on top of the medicine cabinet. Then she began grinding some herbs. The day after next arrived, and Maomao went to the place the letter indicated. It was near a building bustling with civil officials, and not far from the medical office. She estimated she recognized around 80% of the test takers among those who were accepted. Knowing that 8 out of 10 applicants had passed the test made her especially glad she hadn't failed. However, she also felt a little more sympathy for how exasperated Jinshi and Gaoshun had seemed when she had failed the last time. The ages of the assembled women ranged from 14 or 15 to around 20 years old. A few of the girls were older than she was, but Maomao couldn't shake the feeling that she saw a gleam in their eyes. She preferred not to dwell on the reason. They were likely joining the palace service hoping to find a husband. It was a matter that felt increasingly pressing as one got older. Actually, I think it is ideal to be at least 20 before becoming a mother. It was common for girls to get married at 14 or 15 and start having children, but the body was not fully developed at that point. Some women had not even had their first period by then. A few years after the monthly visitor arrived and was coming reliably, you could be sure the body was mature enough to bear children. Marrying too young was, in Maomao's opinion, not a good idea. The pelvis has to be firm or it is tough to deliver the child, she thought. Her hand brushed her hip. She did not expect her body to grow much larger. However, if she ever became pregnant, having a little more weight would be helpful. Birth was often compared to a close encounter with death. Maomao was eager to experience childbirth at least once, but it wasn't something she openly discussed. People might think you were simply being crass if you said you wanted to give birth as an experiment, and if they knew what else Maomao thought on the subject, they would probably get upset. She thought she wouldn't be able to get a decent placenta out of it. When a child was born, the placenta was expelled. In some regions, the mother would eat the discarded placenta to strengthen herself. People said it was quite tasty, like liver sashimi. Animal liver could have parasites if eaten raw, but a placenta should be safe. It would have been part of her own body, after all. Maomao's father had always sternly warned her not to use any part of a human as an ingredient in her medicines. He also warned her not to have any contact with dead bodies, lest terrible curiosity boil up within her. But what about her own placenta? It wasn't a dead body. She wouldn't be using someone else for her ingredients. It was a part of herself. What would be wrong with taking it back in? It would be a way for Maomao to explore an aspect of medicine she hadn't yet encountered. She could do this while still respecting her father's rules. Of course she wanted to do it. "Everyone over here please," an older court lady said. Her gaze was sharp. They had all been given a standard uniform to wear, but some people had embellished theirs with special modifications. Among peacocks, males had the ostentatious plumage. However, with humans the females of the species were the more lavishly attired. Maomao had simply worn the uniform as it was given to her. She did not think she should be very noticeable, so why did she feel like people were looking at her? Was she wearing the dress incorrectly? She wondered. It was the same simple sleeved dress that everyone else was wearing. The uniform top was light pink and the bottom was red, but the colors changed depending on each person's department. It was unlikely that more than 5 people wore the same colors as Maomao. Being an assistant to the medical office was a new position, so perhaps there simply weren't many of them yet. If anything really stood out, it was the band in Maomao's hair. She thought her robe was a slightly darker color than the others. She decided there was no need to worry about it. She walked over to where the older court lady had pointed and joined the line with the other women. Then she bumped into something, or not exactly. That wasn't quite what happened. She hadn't even put her hands out when she fell to the ground. She was lucky her nose wasn't too far out because she landed face first. Dirt covered her from forehead to chin. She stood up and wiped her face with her palm without saying a word. At least her nose wasn't bleeding. "Oh my goodness, I'm sorry," said a woman with an elegant smile on her face. She was wearing the same colors as Maomao and so was everyone walking by with her. "Are you all right?" the older court lady asked, hurrying over. "It's nothing," Maomao said, her face impassive. she thought, this brings back memories. She was in a workplace full of women again, and the inevitable consequences of that nearly brought a warm glow to her heart. The first day of their employment was to be spent being indoctrinated with the principles of court service. Therefore, the new court ladies, numbering fewer than 100, were escorted into a large hall. There they were lectured by their more experienced counterparts. Maomao herself had once given a lecture in a similar hall in the rear palace, and that was all well and good. However, listening to other people talk frankly made her sleepy. There were more than enough chairs and desks for all the attendees, so the newly minted court ladies sat in clusters according to their assignments.